Welcome everyone. Hello and good morning from UK. So, welcome to the Climate Solution podcast. Here we explore the latest developments and innovation strategies to mitigate the impact of climate change. Today we are discussing carbon pricing, a critical policy tool for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and addressing the global crisis of climate change. Me, myself Saikat Das, a director of One Climate Club, and Shraddha Nair, director of One Climate Club and a policy director of Young Women in Sustainable Development. Hi Shraddha, how are you doing?
Hi, Saike. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Rainy day here in London. Um, not something to be surprised about, I guess, since
Yeah,
we know how UK works in general.
exactly.
But the last week was sunny, so yeah, it's rainy day.
So that's amazing. And can can you explain some of the part? Like, can you introduce your young woman in sustainable development sector to all of my viewers? And of course, after then, we will talk about some part about the One Climate Club that we are working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so first of all, hi everyone. Good morning. Still 10 minutes in until afternoon.
Mhm.
So, Young Women in Sustainable Development is based out of Australia, but we have a global reach in terms of the volunteers we have at this organization. And the main idea of having this organization is that we are giving a platform to all the young women across globe uh, to accelerate what they believe in, which is having a holistic sustainable development, starting from all SDGs like zero hunger, water, climate, and across along with having good partnership and goals, focusing on climate change, and also of course all the other aspects of the UN SDGs. So we have different segments within the organization. I'm particularly working in the policy department as a director, and we are. I feel that young women need voice, and this organization is that platform which will give all these young women opportunities to um, believe in, to speak out what they believe in. And I think that holistic approach is what we're trying to also achieve by reducing gender gap in the sector.
No, of course, that's amazing. See, if we speak about SDG goals and sustainability, it's not only about climate 13, the sustainability goal 13. It's all about all the 17th goal. And the 17th goal is also partnership and collaboration with all the goals we have. So if you speak about going to net zero, it's just not going to the emission level and climate level. It's also going towards an inclusion level, where we diversify and include all of the genders together, equality to all of the human abilities, and not just like knowing their gender or color. It's knowing their ability and capability towards the solution they can provide. So of course, like that's an amazing thing that you're doing. Regarding One Climate Club, One Climate Club is a part of Early Birds Club, and Early Birds Club is a company where we give the solutions to the business level. Me and Shraddha both are the director of this company, and we are working on global sector level to minimize the climate crisis, and of course to help the businesses, startups, and of course we can say personal, professional, and business level transformation towards a green economy. So we are on it, and of course, the podcast is a part of that journey where we make our viewers and all of the people, whomsoever we are connected or not connected, directly or indirectly, to make them aware and educate about what is going on climate solutions.
Yeah, truly. We believe that this is for all the people listening to this. This is we absolutely at One Climate Club believe that grassroots level change is what is needed for most of the companies. Corporate, there are lots of people out there who are doing it for big corporates, but there are with so many people having their own startups these days, it's very important that we inculcate a green and sustainable aspect to their operations from a very early stage, and that is what we are here to help for.
Absolutely. From the grassroots level, if we can show them the path and a proper strategy with a direction for transforming towards the net zero goals and reducing the emissions and addressing the global crisis towards their business performance, we can go towards a proper economy with low carbon digestions. So why not? So if I'm moving towards this podcast main goal is what is climate carbon pricing. According to the scientist, and if we can refer different journals and the definition exactly. So carbon pricing refers to the practice of assigning a monetary value to carbon dioxide emissions and the primary contribution to the climate change. So the goal to create a financial incentive for the individuals, businesses, and governments to reduce the carbon footprints and shift towards clean and renewable energy source is also known as the carbon pricing. There are several aspects which Shraddha will guide and, of course, enlighten us about. You, we can say, the background that are not been totally explained in the definition.
Um, yes, so I think carbon pricing is a very hot topic at the moment because many countries and nations and continents, and of course many organizations, have taken up in their day-to-day activities to inculcate a price on the amount of carbon emissions that they're doing. Um, in retrospect, there is no hidden value to what carbon or no hidden definition to what carbon pricing is. It's basically for every ton of carbon you emit, you pay a price. And because we cannot put that generic overarching price on it across globe, we have different segments of the geography within our globe who are trying to modify this price and put a price on carbon based on where they are based out of, how are their operations spread across the globe, and of course who all are the involving parties uh, in their operations.
So yeah, of course, uh, as we can say, carbon pricing is just not just the tax and the pricing that has been put forward. There are certain elements also. If we can put forward two main aspects of carbon pricing, are the carbon taxation and cap and trade system that we are talking about. So as carbon tax are not just tax that we are giving to the government or to the governing bodies or to the anyone who are the concerned authorities. We are the taxpayer paying for the emissions which has been done by the product or by the service that I am paying for. Am I right, Shraddha?
Yeah. That is true. When you put a price on carbon, like you said, there are two aspects to it. One, I think that is very positively going forward, of course, with loopholes, but still positively going forward, is the cap and trade system. It was
Sure.
first originated in the European Union under the EU ETS scheme, which is the European Union's emissions trading scheme. And I
Correct.
think they have set a huge example in terms of how to go forward with this kind of system. You know, when we talk about carbon tax, on the other hand, is just a straight up price. So that is something, again, as people who across globe know how much important it is to governments that we have taxpayers from both private and public sectors. Um, and also majority of the human population, it doesn't come under the rich category. So if putting a tax on carbon for the amount of emissions they are making, that is a huge pushback we are getting, in terms of what people think. They don't want to pay another tax because they're already
Hmm.
paying enough taxes. So I think when you look at carbon tax, people are like, where is all this money going then?
Hmm.
You see that every day. Bad roads, or maybe not good public parks, not good public services for them within a city or a rural area. So then people have this question even now, that I'm paying so much taxes. Where is all this going? Why don't I see
Correct.
the results?
Correct.
So, and that is for tangible things that they can see. Being carbon emissions being a very intangible thing, people are like, I'm taking my car and going out for groceries. I'm burning X amount of fuel. I'm getting carbon emissions. Do I have to pay taxes for that? Where is all this money going? So I think that is something we will come towards the when we discuss about the criticism and where is this money going segment. For emissions trading scheme, I think, do you have some give some highlights in terms of what that is, and then maybe I can pile on to that.
Yes, of course. Why not? Like, see, emission trading schemes are the scheme that is under the cap and trade system right now, the EU scheme. So, emission trading scheme is nothing like we are trading the emissions in terms of capping the overall scenario. So, we have a carbon budget globally, and we have that budget to know that what is our maximum limit of emissions in a more allowable process to go to maintain the 1.5 alive, right? So whenever the government sets a legal limit on the total amount of allowable and issue the permits and their right to the proper company to emit less and allow them for a surplus unit that can create a financial incentive to reduce the emissions. So whenever there is an excess of emission from the surplus one or from the provided one, they put a tax or money on the same amount, and they try to minimize the emissions through various forms of offsetting or various form of carbon neutralities by taking forward the credits. So that goes towards the credit because the emission has already been used. So the credit has been carried forward for the next year, which minimize the emissions cap by certain level that they have already used. So the budget is like overall budget, yearly budget we have to use. So this emission union emission trading system allows the world to just move forward with a capping system taxations. And for an example, the EU emissions taxations, they are successfully converting, like emissions and reducing it by 43% since 2005. So that's a great example of them with under the EU Green Deal, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add on to that point, I would say that for the EU emissions, that is something that they started. But
Mhm.
just for the viewers and listeners as well, there is this cap and trade system is being adopted across globe,
Globe.
and although the EU has started it, there are many other countries who have taken this out moderately successfully, I should say, and they should definitely go forward with this scheme. Because just to give an example of what Saket was explaining before, for example, if you have a cap of 100 tons of emissions per year, which is of course too less, but
Mhm.
just to give an example, and you are pricing the carbon at X amount of money per ton or X dollars per ton, and if you have your total emissions for the year as 80 tons, let's say 80 tons of carbon, then of course you have a reduced or incentivized level of amount of money you have to pay for that, and you are saving 20 tons worth of credit. And if you go beyond that, let's say 120, then you have to pay extra for the 20 tons of additional emissions that you have done. So basic example of a cap and trade system is this how it works. You have a certain cap which you cannot cross. If you're less than that, good for you. If you're more than that, all that money actually goes into the scheme to the government, and which they will be using further to redirect all that fund towards clean technology initiatives. So yeah, absolutely. I think across globe there are some countries. Most of them are within the European region and a few within the Asia. And I don't think the North Americans have expanded so far. Speaking in terms of having a cap and trade system, but some states within the United States have, for example, California have a
Yep.
great initiative they have taken in terms of putting a price on carbon.
Yes, they have their own pricings, and of course, like you can say, the British Columbia in Canada, they are also doing great in the pricing system. From 5 to 15% of less reductions. It's not bad. But
Yeah,
I think for level playing field, the target should be more ambitious to go towards to 2050. It's not just 15 or 5%. We have to go at least of 70% of emissions to be done minimum in the same road level. So I think yeah, more or lessly doing some research and putting forward some updates on the taxation system might get improved for our the target that has to be met. World Bank estimated that the worldwide price has to be $40 per metric ton of carbon dioxide. That would result into the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2025. So if
that's
you can,
achievable.
yeah, exactly, correct. It's an ambitious, of course, like
Yeah,
seeing the situation right now that is going on. It's ambitious, but for getting the ambition done, like 2025, if
yeah.
I'm speaking with 2020 2050, so that means we can multiply it by 1.5. That means like at least 70% of it has to be minimized.
Yeah, I think that's where the benefits of carbon pricing would come into picture, because people are asking this question: where is all this money going? So the main concern or the main aim of having a price on carbon is that you redirect all this money that's coming out of, whether it's a tax, whether it's a cap and trade system, whether it's some form of a fee that you're putting on carbon emissions, is that all this money is being redirected into green technology initiatives.
Mhm.
And there are millions of organizations out there, I'm believing, at least that has come up in the last 1 decade. So many organizations who are trying to either focus on some SDG or the other. Some people are trying to put all the money into technology, which we absolutely need given that we are phasing out fossil fuels. Although some news lately from the UK government and some Middle East government have not been conducive to what we're trying to achieve to reach the emission reduction by 50% or so by 2050. But again, some places it's difficult to phase out. Some places we are able to phase out coal and other fossil fuel technology. But we need something to replace because population is increasing. There's more demand in terms of energy and everything else. So all this money is what we understand is being redirected to investing into either climate change mitigation and adaptation, loss and damage, some form of climate financing. I think that was also the theme under which COP27 was based out of. And I think they were,
Adaptation and
yeah,
loss and damage, of course, like everyone is looking towards the same situation. Let's see what
yeah.
the outcome goes.
Definitely. So I feel that that is one of the benefits of having carbon price, that you are trying to aim. Well, like you said, the World Bank said that it is like $40 per metric ton. That would be steep for some countries whose economy is not that great, where
Mhm.
basic necessity is not being met for human needs, but like electricity, water, clean food, and things like that. But I think for some other countries, we still have very high price of carbon. Um, in fact, Germany has the highest price. I'm not sure, but yeah, you can definitely go into the finding out which country has what level of carbon pricing.
Correct.
Some of them are even pricing carbon at $100 and $200. So
Yeah.
that is a steep price. But if you are emitting that much amount of carbon, if it's a carbon intensive sector, people
Mhm.
should pay for it. And
Yeah.
that's the question. I think this is also important to everybody listening to this out there. Between now and 2050, you have to accept the fact that at some point or the other, you will end up paying price for carbon. This could be through any means. There might be a direct tax implementation by a government, or you are maybe forced to, not forced, I should say, you are maybe needing to pay carbon price through your corporate responsibility schemes or some other scheme. So I think people should be eventually ready for the fact that at some point or the other they have to pay a fee for that, which is eventually good and also not nice when the economy is not great and the world is just coming out of a pandemic, a recession. Some countries are still having high inflation rates. People are barely making the ends meet. So yes, that's something we need to look out for.
Of course, like as you said, many important stuffs inside. Like in your whole sentence, there are like very minute sectors that have a vast explanation on the part. So as you said about the $40 per metric ton, of course, like for many countries it's a huge money because of the conversion rate, and for many countries it's like a nominal rate because they are already paying a huge amount, other or less, right? So if you can see that if the world can goes in unilateral policy, right, where they are paying for the same amount but it has to be converted, like the developing countries are facing the crisis much more, where they are not liable for that, right? And the developed countries who are paying for the carbon emissions that they are doing, it can be levelized by getting the money from the developed countries, the excess money above the marginal amount, and then can be transferred to the developing countries where they actually need it because they are bare minimum living there. So if it can be minimized and it can be levelized over there, so of course it can be done. And in fact, so the most important part, I can say that the emissions can be cost, or the reductions can be minimized, but the tangible thing is not tangible. Where it comes the social cost of carbon. So if the social cost of carbon can be make aware with all the holistic approach, because it's not the social cost of a reduction that we are saying about. It's also about the benefits, the environmental benefits, the health benefits, the minimum crisis benefits, the loss and damage protocols. Everything comes under the social cost of carbon. And if it can be financially marginalized, then there will be a like huge difference in the mindset of people who already want to pay, because they can see the benefits which is outreaching the cost. And the cost is the huge, like the climate crisis, the loss and damage, the emission level, and of course the health, which is much more important. If
Yeah.
we can manage to portray the whole overall cost that we can set on with financially, the benefits and the social cost, and we can just present it to the whole world with a unilateral level playing policy, so I think that can be minimized. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that the whole fundamental concept of social cost of carbon came into picture because economists at some point or the other, I think about a decade and a half ago, they decided that climate change is a market failure. That is where we are understanding the concept of social cost of carbon. And um, because I was a common man before I moved into policy, consulting business, it's just that um, from a common man's perspective, well, all I care about is how much do I have to pay? Can I see the difference? Where is all this going? I'm paying it now, but the difference I might see it after 10, 20 years. I might or might not be alive till then. Um, but the other aspect of this, especially from a policy making perspective, is that you need this concept among decision makers and economists to see the social and the environmental or the governance aspect of it when we put a price on carbon. That is the only way we will be able to see uh, a clear pathway of actually implementing the price of carbon. But again, that's from a very policy making perspective. That's
Mhm.
just to see that how much is it going to cost the government. How is my country being going to be affected by this? That aspect of, like you said, having a marginal cost, um, you can only implement a marginal cost if you look through the lens of a common person who's actually paying for it. Yeah,
Correct.
definitely. I think that's a very key important point you have brought up here about social cost of carbon.
Yeah, well, in fact, I remember that the social cost of carbon can also reduce the carbon leakage that we have if it can be levelized and unitarily made the policy for the whole world. It's because, as you say, as you know, that we have three emissions, right? The scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, right? But the scope 3 emissions are really really difficult to phase them and to marginalize them in proper documentation form, right? So for that thing, I think, as an example of China is the world largest emitter of greenhouse gas right now, right? And they also set a launch of national wide carbon market in the coming year. So that's the whole world is watching them, of course, in a positive way, that how they will come up with the policies and the carbon tax, because having an emission greater than all of the world and minimizing with huge population, this is the main factor that we are looking at. If it worked in China, and as some ETS is also working in few countries, then both of the elements can be come together, and we can make a unitary policy for all of the world for minimizing the carbon leakage, of course.
Yeah, just to clarify some key points or key jargons that Saket mentioned now. Scope 1 to 3 emissions. Of course, scope 1 is direct emissions that you get from burning fuels. Scope 2 is the electricity usage, with like the second stage or second level emissions that you can consider. And scope 3 emissions is, like he mentioned, the hardest to measure because of this complexity of the upstream and the downstream supply chain. And like you said, a very key point here, like about China being one of the biggest emitters. And it is crucial for scope 3 emissions because many countries have their supply chain linked directly to the Chinese market. And to map scope 3 emissions is where people would say the loophole of carbon leakage comes into picture. So basically, carbon leakage is like, for example, I have a factory set up in the UK, and here I have to pay, for example, $50 per ton, let's say. But I also realize that I can move to some other country in maybe Europe or Asia or some other place where I would not have to pay as much per ton of carbon. So,
Less
but I
stringent
still.
policies as compared to the policy they have set up initial level.
Correct. That's correct. So then, based on that, I can move my operations there and still be able to export or import goods. And most of the exporters, manufacturing units are set up in China. So then, and other Asian countries, of course, other East Asian and Southeast Asian countries. And when that happens, the cost of carbon there is all they have to pay for, not the one they are actually set up in. So that form of carbon leakage can definitely be reduced. And I think one major segment of internal carbon pricing would be, to reduce this whole, or to help reduce scope 3 emissions would be internal carbon pricing. Saikit, do you have any thoughts on how we can, what is your take on how carbon leakage can be tackled?
According to me, carbon leakage is a problem with the difference in the taxations and the pricing that we are putting forward for the emissions. So, as said, it's just not for the production system; it's also for the service sector. And while both of them acts towards the we can say the import and the export, the whole supply chain. So, minimizing the supply chain emissions is an important part when we can introduce some blockchain method to know where and how the emissions are being tracked. Because for the blockchain method, it's a global ledger that has been maintained. So every ledger has been maintained in precursor production or service they have done, and the whole supply chain we can track onto, and then tracking every blockchain part, every sector where the products and the services are being given, and the supply chain that has been passed on. We can minimize the carbon leakage by an unified, we can say, a coefficient of tax that marginalize the whole system in a level playing field. According to me, it has to be done. So I think Of course, you know about the EU's CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, that has been proposed into 2026 to put forward. So I think the CBAM will be an amazing, the game changer, you can say, in the whole carbon leakage aspect. But it's always on the mode of practice right now, because we don't know what the outcome is and how it has to be put forward in more practice way, like in global level. But within few years after the implementation of CBAM, we can uh, we can come up with few answers of the carbon leakage solution that might be put forward for the 2050 targets.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think the CBAM would be a key policy that would be released and can be useful to reduce carbon leakage. I think, but most of the that would be mostly conducive for manufacturing companies
Mm-hmm.
and other corporates. Currently, what they're doing right now is to implement an internal fee, that is the internal carbon pricing, and that is very crucial. And of many millions of companies out there on the in the globe, uh, I think only a handful of them are currently focused on internal carbon pricing. It's very risky, and because you are actually trying to put some form of an implicit fee or a straight up tax or some form of shadow pricing,
Hmm.
which is key because you don't know how the market value of carbon price will change, and when you're looking at such volatile structure, it is important that companies who are actually implementing internal carbon pricing, they take in great care in terms of what price are they putting on, and usually it is suggested that whatever is the current market price, you implement $10 per ton extra on your internal carbon fee. And I think it's great that you mentioned CBAM because it's important that by 2026, all those companies who are planning to implement an internal carbon pricing, which
Correct.
eventually will reduce their emissions, um, because when you're paying a fee internally, you would want that most projects should be more efficient, be have
Hmm.
good energy performance, or see how much reduce their emissions in terms of when their projects come up. So I think having an internal carbon price would be directly linked, um, and most organizations should consider that this type of fee should be aligned, especially after 2024. If you are bringing up a new project in your company, or in your nation, and you want to make sure that the carbon price you put internally aligns with the CBAM. Because if you're exporting or importing, that CBAM price should not there should not be a huge difference between the CBAM price and then what your internal carbon price, because then you would go into loss. Because then that would be like another pandemic being hit on your revenues of your business. So yeah, I think it's great that, and I feel that CBAM is very important because at some point or the other, like I said, you have to end up paying price um, in the next 30 years at some point. So especially for huge organizations and multi-level corporate companies, that's like a huge point for them. I think that
Are
was
you
where the criticism
referring?
would come into picture.
Yeah, exactly. So, in fact, are you also referring that for in your point of view and what exactly you have said about that? Are you also referring that business from now has to include the revenues that has to be gone for in part of carbon internal carbon pricing has to be taken care in their market strategy for 3 5 years back, like from now,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
the revenue inclusions and what do we say that business pitch decks and revenue models, it has to be included for the further years that is coming. So I think as your sentence says, from now, at least from 2024 before the CBAM, they have to include the internal pricing in as the business model for future generations.
Yeah, definitely. Because when you have CBAM in place, that means you are eventually, right now, you are only paying price for where you are placed out of, a little bit price on the export and the imports. But when CBAM comes into picture, you are actually paying for all the scope 3 emissions you are responsible for. So before that hits you too hard, it's important that you start with internal carbon pricing one project at a time. I know that, and as somebody who's working on it currently with some of the, at where I am currently, it's I understand that it's a very risky business because, like you said, it's if you're trying to include that in your future investment decisions, in your revenue models, and when you at the end of the day, when you look at that balance sheet, you don't want to see a negative NPV. So just to, or at least a break even for some projects,
Mhm.
because you are including the ESG aspect to it. When you do that, eventually you will understand what kind of pricing works, and for different projects different pricing works. Just like we cannot put a blanket type price across the globe based on economies and developing
Correct.
and developed countries. Similarly, even within an organization, I feel that for different segments of the company, for different projects, you would have to have a very curated carbon price that has to be put, because every outcome of every project would be different you know
Of course, as you said that the NPV has to be met for a proper payback period. We have to always look forward for the revenue has to met with at least the break-even point. So it's also saying about we can say the just transition, because the business has to be sustained. All the business has to be sustained. If there's a transition, there should be a justified one. We don't want any people or any person losing their jobs, and we don't want any market to lose their revenues out of it. So I think just transition is also a part overall right now in terms of leveling this whole system. And if we can say if we can say that the energy trilemma, as an economist, you and me knows that energy trilemma is the main part for maintaining the whole energy system of any country. So being as we say, energy equity, energy security, and of course the environmental, three of them are always intact with the financial condition of that country, the economy of the country. And the economy is will be good if the amount that the country's people are paying and has then can be redirected to them for investing in proper efficient energy technology or low carbon technologies, which will help them in future generations.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because and I know this is a little bit hard truth coming from our end at this point, because like I said, we are coming out of a pandemic. We just came out of pandemic. We hit recession, and right now, if people had to choose between two things, whether they would want to pay too much amount of money for carbon, or whether they want to meet their basic needs, I think people would choose meeting their basic needs, at
Correct.
least for the next 5 6 years until the economy is up and running. But it is also crucial that we scrunch the numbers a little bit and make the finances a little bit tight, so that right now, if we don't do it now, because it'll be too late by then. And I think everybody at this point understands the importance of keeping that 1.5-degree target, or at least the 2-degree target. Given there's going to be more economic uprise, more economic issues that's going to come into the picture in the future, unknown pandemics, unknown epidemics, nobody knows what's going to happen.
Mhm.
A lot more climate disasters, as we are see, we have seen in the last week. It's
Right
I
now, I
think
think it's just started and it's common in every sector. Like
that's
if we can give an example of Turkey right now,
yeah,
uh, really sad to see
yeah,
this kind of situation
yeah.
right
Of
now.
course, our whole hearts go out to people who have been affected by that. But there's going to be more climate disasters. That is a result of what we have been doing in the past 10 years. So if we don't take an action now, we need to. That is where policymakers come into picture. To be able to figure out how not to break the economy, that find that algorithm. And I think that is something we would definitely at One Climate Club is also trying to figure
Exactly.
out. How to not break the economy so that people can live, but also not affect the climate in such a way. If not, make it worse. If not make it worse, we can at least try to um, keep things as it is, in such a way that there is at least no more emissions, or a reduction of a lot of emissions. But I think that's where a lot of criticism would come into picture. Definitely, we would need another hour if we were to go on for the criticisms.
Yes, of course. Like some argues that it's an unfairly impact, to the low-income households and
Yeah,
businesses that doesn't have far enough to reduce emissions.
yeah,
However, as you said, it will take a lot of time to explain and have discussions.
yeah,
So of course, to just refer to our viewers, we will come up with a much more podcast that we've spoken about the criticism, of course, with the just transition, about the degrowth. Degrowth is a whole new level right now that has been that are very common in research and scientists for going towards an economic aspect. We'll also speak about that, but right now I'm really thankful to Shraddha that she came up into this podcast. She's in the office right now, I know, and she is doing her works, and I think in 1 hour a pile of work has been accumulated for sure. But still, really, thank you so much for coming in the podcast and making our viewers an aware and educated about what is exactly is going on towards the climate pricing.
no problem. Thank you so much for having me, Saikit. And I think this is a very critical point within the nation at the moment, that we need to talk about these things, and perhaps give direction to policymakers, give direction to corporates who are trying to make this carbon pricing moderate success, if not a huge success, and save what is left of our planet.